Okay. Hey everybody, Joe Venorni, Cherry, the Geek TV. We are here at Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con 2022, where we're celebrating all things games and television shows and comics and movies. And what better movie than a movie about movies? And we have two producers of a new documentary coming out. It's called 1982, The Greatest Geek Year Ever. Scott Mantz, Tom Vitale, welcome to Cherry, the Geek TV. Now, I've been coming to your panels that you host for years. I believe I was at the 1980, there was a ever for the 30th anniversary, I think, in 1982. I was there in that audience. So I know that's kind of the genesis of the film, but when was the idea sparked that we can turn these panels into a full documentary?
Well, about three and a half years ago, Mark Altman, who was also on the panel, and Roger Lay Jr., who's a documentary filmmaker, we're all friends, and we were talking about how 1982 really is the greatest geek year ever. I mean, you had, just in the month of June alone, Poltergeist, Star Trek II, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Blade Runner, John Carpenter's The Thing. And we talked about doing it as a coffee table book. And then we immediately switched gears to make it a documentary, because between the three of us, we know all the filmmakers and all the experts and the critics and the pundits who could really weigh in on this and really make a special documentary. So that's how it started.
And who are some of the people that you've got lined up for this film? I mean, there's a lot of films that were great that year. Who can we expect to see in this documentary talking about those films?
You can definitely expect to see, for sure, Oscar-winning director Ron Howard talking about his very special, one of his first movies, Night Shift. We also got Henry Winkler, and he gave us his home movies from behind the scenes of Night Shift, which we have exclusively in our documentary. You also have Amy Heckerling, the director of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Of course, you got William Shatner talking about Star Trek II. You have
Paul Schrader, the director of Paul Schrader, award-winning director, talking about Cat People. You have Roger Corman, who is fabulous. I mean, he's still out there making movies. He's in his 90s, and he's doing interviews, making movies. He's great. Susan Seidelman.
You have the mom from E.T., the mom from Poltergeist. Both of those movies came out 1 week apart, June 4th and June 11th. The June 4th for Poltergeist, June 11th for E.T. And we have the moms from both of those movies, Jo Beth Williams and Dee Wallace, talking about that incredible summer of Spielberg. I mean, 1982, when you really wrap your head around it, which is what we do with this documentary, you just go, holy friggin' moly, 1982 was amazing.
And it's not just about the movies or the segments on so many different movies, talking to the actors, the directors, people behind it, but it's also about the experience of watching these movies and being there, live, not watching something on streaming in your living room, which is a whole different kind of experience, which is fantastic, obviously the convenience, but it's talking about the community being in a theater with hundreds of other people who share the same interests and being scared together, or laughing at Fast Times at Ridgemont High together, or cheering on Sylvester Stallone and Rambo or Rocky III together. That communal experience is something that maybe some of the movie audience is losing these right now, but in 1982, the emotional resonance of those movies when you watched it with your friends and family, it's incredible. We talk about that too, how important that year was.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because there have been other great geek years, 1987, 1999.
99 was great.
99 is a great year. What is it, do you think, about 1982, though, that what was the perfect storm of things that made that year? I think you can list all those other years, but I think 1982 is the greatest geek year ever.
Well, we talk about that in the documentary. It didn't just kind of happen. There was a build-up to that. Of course, 1982 started in 1977, of course, with Star Wars and Close Encounters and even like The Spy Who Loved Me. But there was also like a transition. We had a president who was an actor, Ronald Reagan. You had music videos, MTV, what really changed the game for that whole thing. And you had the space shuttle, and all of these filmmakers who were inspired by the likes of Star Wars and Close Encounters all just rushed out and made their own special passion projects, which happened to be all these movies that came out at the same time in 1 year, 1982.
So the way technology was growing in the 80s, science fiction was quickly becoming science fact. And you had a lot of these filmmakers coming into their own anyway. People who grew up reading Starlog or Fangoria or all these other fan magazines, they all came of age together and they all wanted to make their projects. And the studios took risks. It was a very different, from a business point of view, it was a very different environment than it is today. The studios were willing to take risks. And you had these filmmakers who were truly auteurs that went out there with a vision and mostly made brilliant movies. And then there were some movies that were less brilliant,
Yeah.
But beloved, like we talk a lot about Megaforce, which is one of the funniest segments in the movie. Maybe not a brilliant movie, but is beloved now. And it really was somebody's vision, and they went out and they executed it. It wasn't an easy movie to make, Megaforce, but they made it. And you really do have movies that came from the heart, that came from people's visions, and the studios allowed it.
Do you think that there can be, in these times, another year like 1982? Do you think, because I kind of think CGI has ruined creativity, there's exceptions here and there every year, but I think for the most part that it's just not the same. I mean, the films in 1982, the special effects aren't necessarily the best. I mean, some are groundbreaking, but they're not necessarily the best, but the stories are all great.
Stories are where it's at. The script's the thing. The play's the thing. I mean, Shakespeare said it himself. Without a good story, without good characters, a special effect is a boring thing. And that was actually said by George Lucas. A special effect without a good story is a boring thing. But you're right. I mean, 1982, you had all these movies. The visual effects were done practically. It was, ironically, the movie in 1982 that featured the first CGI ever was Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. The sequence with the Genesis demonstration was CGI. But regardless, it's about the practical effects. Like when you're watching The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is one of the scariest movies ever made, bombed in 1982. It's beloved now. It's an absolute classic, an absolute masterpiece. And the visual effects, the practical effects, the makeup and all that, it is still holds up to this day. And there is a magic to those movies from 1982 that the magic is just not what it used to be. When you look back at that time, when you rewatch those movies, and when you realize that you had to work for those movies because you had to wait in line for hours. You couldn't just order tickets online like you can today. Like you had to wait in line. I can remember.
Which was part of community building because you were talking to people in line with you. But there's something about practical effects that just feels more real. I mean, look, there's incredible things people could do with CGI, and there's things you could see in movies today you could not have seen or done back then. There were movies I made today that could not have been made back then. But there's still something about a practical effect that makes it, in many ways, feel more real. So when you have The Thing, and you have not CGI, but they built models and actual, gooey stuff dripping and heads that were created by true artists.
I mean, the Thing, like the legs coming out of the guy's head after it's severed off, and you're watching that, and you're just going like, even today in 2022, you're watching that going like, what the hell was that?
And there's a story in the documentary about how there's a fire gag in The Thing, and they had to shoot it twice because the head didn't work right. And this poor guy, who's the effects guy, who's in the fire, he's like, okay, we'll do it again. And now you just to the computer and you make fake fire, and which is great on one level, but it doesn't feel the same way as a viewer. Now you ask, could we have another year of that kind of creativity? I think one of the great things about all the technology we have today is that creativity has become even more democratized than ever before. So there are people out there, people watching this right now, who are out there making their own stories, and there's so much being made, so much being published, that I think every year has fantastic and great creative work out there. The harder thing now is actually finding it because it's so dispersed across the internet, and you don't have big studios with huge marketing budgets. So I think there's great stuff being made today, but can you find it?
Yeah.
And that's hard.
I also think that today, and Dean Devlin, the writer producer of Independence Day, he's interviewed for our documentary because he's our age and he's Gen Xer and all that stuff. So he was like our age in '82. He tells a great story about how he was pitching a project and the person he pitched it to said no, and he goes, well, we made Independence Day together. Why can't we make this movie? And he goes, well, I wouldn't make Independence Day today because it's not based on another property. And now that's what people want. They want Marvel superheroes. They want DC. They want more Star Wars sequels. The originality that defined the year of 1982. I think you still get that from time to time. You're lucky you get a movie that is completely original, but I think that's few and far between. So to answer your question, I think in terms of just the creative jolt that collectively was represented by 1982, I don't think we're going to see that again. I think really the last great year for movies in general was 99.
So the film's almost completed. You showed a couple clips from it here in the panel just now. When can people see the film?
So we've gotten into a very big film festival, and they're going to announce their lineup in about 3 or 4 weeks, so we can't say anything now, unfortunately. And then we're waiting to hear from a couple of other film festivals that are named film festivals. So what we'll do is we'll do the film festival circuit first, and we're excited to do that. And then after that, it will be distributed. Hopefully, it depends when the festival season ends, and then looking at either the end of 2022 or early in 2023, it will be picked up out of the festivals by, one of the streaming services, most likely. So I think people just have to keep watching. Look at our hashtags, 1982 movies on Twitter and Instagram.
And also, obviously want to have this movie out for people to see before the end of the year, because this
the
is
40th
the
anniversary
of the greatest geek year ever. So the movie it's finished. It just needs to be color timed, corrected, the sound balanced, and all that stuff. Just a tighter edit and everything like that. But in terms of how it's going to be seen, if it plays in a theater, great. If it plays on a streaming service, great. If a streaming service says to us, we love the film, but we want more, can you give us a 5-part series? We have more than enough interview footage there for a documentary series for the likes of Hulu, Amazon.
That's awesome.
And eventually there'll be a DVD which will have an incredible amount of bonus features as
That's
well.
going to be great.
And we want to thank, this thing was kicked off by Kickstarter, so that was our seed money, so we want to thank all our Kickstarter backers. But one of the things I hope, Scott, that people do is they watch this, not just in this year, but in the years to come, and they watch the doc, and then they pick one of those movies, especially younger viewers who may not have seen The Thing, or may not have seen Blade Runner, or may not have seen Star Trek 2, or Megaforce, and they actually watch that movie after seeing our segment on that movie, and they go back and they rediscover all these movies thanks to our documentary. So,
and when we were screening clips from our documentary here at Comic-Con, the reaction from each of the clips that we showed, the reactions were just unanimously overwhelming.
Yeah, it's really well put together.
We had a packed room at Comic-Con, one of the bigger rooms. It was packed, and people seemed to love it. So that really felt good here.
So before we go, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to make you choose. If you had to pick one, I'll even let you pick two. One or two films, 1982. You had to pick. This is the film. What you going to go with? At the time, 1982 was probably Star Trek 2 was probably the one that influenced me as a 12-year-old, and probably the Beastmaster because it was on so much. But since then, and Grease 2, the superior Grease, the superior Grease.
Just a 3.
But I think as an adult, the ones I've gone back and watched the most would probably be John Carpenter's The Thing, and probably still Star Trek 2. But Scott, what's your pick?
Well, for when I was a 13-year-old kid in 1982, it was Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. As a 53-year-old man in 2022, it's still Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. But in terms of the movie that I didn't get when I was 13 years old in 82, to the movie that I certainly get now and love and cherish, and it's one of my favorite movies of all time, that movie is Blade Runner.
And for me, I hate to say what you were saying, but Star Trek II was, such an important movie for me, and I was right there, scared that were they killing off Spock, weren't they? And it's still, it's still watchable, more than watchable. It's a wonderful movie now. But the movies for me that are the most important, I think, for '82, first and foremost, Blade Runner, of course. But I'm a horror guy too. I love horror movies, and The Thing is one of the greatest horror movies ever, and it was so groundbreaking. So I've got to put The Thing in the top 2 or 3 from 1982, and just for being a great movie and an important movie in the genre.
And also, one honorable mention is Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I just rewatched that movie recently, and that movie totally holds up. It's got the great cast. It has a totally awesome soundtrack. And every time I watch Fast Times at Ridgemont High, when that movie is over, I want more. I always want more. I want that movie to keep going. That's how good that movie made you feel in '82, and that's how good Fast Times makes you feel today.
Well, you can see more Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Star Trek 2 and Blade Runner and The Thing and Grease 2, the superior Grease movie in 1982, the greatest geek year ever, which is coming soon, later this year or early next year. Scott and Tom, thank you so much for chatting with us on Cherry the Geek TV. Stay tuned, more coverage, Comic-Con 2022.